Hello, this is Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Ansari, Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University. Today friends, I will be making my presentation on presidential system. Now, the first true presidential system was developed during the United States Constitutional Convention in 1787. To understand the concept of presidential system, we need to go into the history and see how it evolved and what are its features and how well it has been functioning. So, the United States is the originator and the primary example of the presidential system, and it is followed by few other democracies such as Argentina, Brazil, Mexico and Philippines. So, the presidential system is the dominant form of government in the mainland Americas, with most of its sovereign states being presidential republic. However, there are very few presidential republics in Europe. The presidential system is based on the separation of and sharing of powers among three independent branches of government, that is legislative, executive and judiciary. Now, this system prevents any one branch from continuously dominating the government. So, the presidential system or the pattern of government has its origin in the United States, and it is now confined to certain countries which are exclusively in the Western Hemisphere as well as in some other countries. Now, Pakistan too adopted this system under General Ayub Khan, but again reverted to the parliamentary system in 1973. Now, it shall be instructive to know the factors which contributed towards its emergence in the United States and the shape of the governmental machinery as it assumed. Now, there are two factors which influence the framers of the American Constitution against the cabinet form of government. In the first place, Montesquieu's theory of separation of power. It had a great appeal in the minds of the American fathers, especially those who laid the foundation of the country. Now, the theory of limited government, which is the natural conclusion that is drawn from this particular form of government, the doctrine of political and popular sovereignty had convinced the framer of the Constitution of the necessity of separating the three branches of the government, as it prevented tyranny and absolutism. Now, if liberty had to last, they argued, the political direction of the authority should not concentrate in any one of the branches of the government. Now, secondly, they knew that cabinet government could function only when the life of the nation was divided into distinct political parties, each with its own separate program and platform. The political parties, the framers of the Constitution believed, weakened the national solidarity by creating sharp cleavages, whereas the need of the time was at that time the unity out of diversity of new nation. So, they accordingly created an executive department independent of and coordinate with the legislative department, an energetic yet dignified executive capable of performing national laws, capable of enforcing national laws firmly, and one which should lend a note of stability to the new government. Now, when we look at the nature of a presidential system, we find the quotation of Begot very pertinent when he says the independence of the legislative and executive powers is a specific quality of the presidential government, just as fusion and combination is the principle of cabinet government. So, both cabinet and presidential systems are representative in character, but responsibility of the executive to the legislature is the sine qua non of the former, whereas the latter is constitutionally independent of the legislature. In presidential system, the president is the chief executive and is responsible for enforcing laws. The president oversees the executive branches of government, which includes the cabinet and various administrative bureaus and agencies. The president also commands the armed forces and is responsible for the defense of the country. The legislative branch, consisting of House of Representatives and Senate, is responsible for making law for the land. The judicial branch, including the Supreme Court, it interprets and applies the law in specific cases. Now, there are checks and balances among these three branches of government to prevent any branch from becoming excessive or abusive. Elected officials in a presidential system served fixed terms of office, unlike a parliamentary system where elections can be held whenever the government loses majority in the parliament. Now, under the presidential system, the legislature and the executive are two distinct departments of government. There is more or less a separation between the two. Executive is neither the creature of legislature nor it is responsible to that body for its public acts or dependent on it for its survival. So, the head of the state, the president, is the real executive both as a matter of law and fact, and such power is the result of the direct grant from the constitutional authority effected through the express provision of the constitution. Now, the fact that the president is not merely a chief executive, but the executive makes all ministers or the cabinet members his assistant and thus denies them more independent positions of ministers in a parliamentary system. Now, when we talk about the role of these ministers who form the cabinet in presidential form, we find the word cabinet being used for them on lines with the presidential, on lines with parliamentary form is a misnomer to describe a minister who constitute the president or president's cabinet. Neither is there any cabinet in the presidential system, nor are these ministers. Both are the product of the parliamentary system. The members of the so-called cabinet in the presidential system are not members of the legislature and they do not belong to the legislative majority party. As a result, they have no access to the legislature. They do not take part in the debates. They have no locus standi to initiate and pilot legislation or to defend the policy of government or stand in the need of seeking its confidence. Nor have they any power to advise dissolution of legislature and appeal to the electorate if the legislature does not approve their policy. They have indeed no policy of their own. So, the policy of the government is that of the head of the state who appoints them and restrains them in office as long as it pleases him. They are responsible to him. And they are retained in the office by the president as it pleases him. They are responsible to only him and to no one else. So, the cabinet under presidential system is, in brief, is a tool of the head of the state. He can override the opinion of its members and he may not seek, or even if he does, it is for him to decide whether to consult them individually or collectively. And as for its members, a breath unmakes them and a breath had made them. Just a command of the president will make them a member and another command will make them deprived of their membership. So, they don't derive their membership or their power or their position or their status by the virtue of the legislature or any other body than president himself. Then when we see the relation of executive and the legislature in the presidential form, we find that it has a status of independent or coordination with the legislature and it is not subject to the direction or control of the legislature over the executive. Now, the duties of chief executive and his administrative officers, the members of cabinet by law designated secretaries in United States, it lie wholly in the executive and administrative field and they have no responsibility whatsoever in respect of the legislative functions, except as it may be their duty to make own or come to know about the legislature, the need for legislation in order that they execute administrative functions and may be of more effective in performing it. Now, Garner gives a matter-of-fact analysis of the presidential system when he says what has been called residential government as distinguished from cabinet or parliamentary government is that system in which the executive, including both the head of the state and his ministers, is constitutionally independent of legislature in respect of the duration of his or their tenure and irresponsible to it for his or their political policies. The system is not presidential because it has an elected president as the chief executive. It is presidential because president is the real executive who does not owe his office to the legislature, nor can he be removed from office by the legislature. So, in a parliamentary system, a real executive is the creature of legislature and remains in office at its will, but that is not the case in the presidential form. Now, if you look at the president and his powers and the way he comes to acquire the office, we find that the power of president in a presidential system is significant and comes from various sources. According to the United States Constitution, the president has explicit power such as signing or vetoing legislation, such as commanding the armed forces, granting reprieves and pardons. The president also has the power to make treaties, appoint executive officers, control foreign policy. So, as the commander-in-chief, the president has supreme operational command and control over United States armed forces. However, the power to declare war is vested only in Congress. In presidential system, the president is the chief executive, the head of the state. The president oversees the executive branch of government, which includes the cabinet and various administrative bureaus and agencies. The president has the power and duty to carry out and enforce laws and is responsible for the defense of the country. The legislative branch, consisting of the House of Representatives and Senate, is responsible for making laws, while the judicial branch interprets and applies the law. So, these separate and independent branches of government prevent the president from becoming too powerful and ensure a system of checks and balance. The presidency of the United States is one of the greatest political offices in the world. Its occupant has become, with the exception of Central European dictators, the most powerful head of the government known to our day. He is absolutely free with respect to the exercise of his powers and tenure of office, and except that all appointments made and treaties concluded by him are ratified by the Senate. Now, as his term of office goes by calendar, his responsibility to the electorate is unforeseeable. He can only be impeached by the Senate. His conviction by the Senate cannot carry a greater penalty than removal from the office, a disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust or profit in the United States. Now, in the exercise of his executive duties, the president is assisted by his secretaries, who are the head of different departments, and are now around 10 secretariats of the president are merely his personal assistants. They are appointed by him and are responsible to him. None of them is a member of Congress, nor is he responsible to it. Though popular usage collectively gives to these departmental heads the name of cabinet, yet it's a misnomer to designate them as such. The president cannot shift his responsibility to this body nor his office to them. He cannot take them and make them individually or collectively accountable to the legislature or country for the policies and actions of the federal government over which he presides. So, their responsibility is to the president alone. Cabinet in the United States is a mere creation of president's will. So, in presidential system, the president's cabinet consists of individuals who provide information and advice to the president. However, the cabinet's impact on presidential decision making can vary from one president to another. Cabinet members may have access and influence due to their personal relationship with the president rather than the inherent power of their position. In parliamentary system, cabinet members belong to the same party as the prime minister and play a significant role in the government and public policy formation. The Prime Minister consults with cabinet members regarding proposed actions. Now, talking about the powers, it's an extra statutory and extra constitutional body, and these secretaries and these ministers, they exist only by the custom. If the President desires to dispense with it, he can do it. The procedure as it stands today is that the cabinet meets ordinarily once a week, and the President places before it questions upon which he thinks or she needs their advice, and the members bring to the cabinet such matters in their respective departments as they deem appropriate for cabinet conference and general discussion. Voters are seldom taken and into confidence about their appointment, and the votes which they cast in such meetings are seldom taken as something very important. Beyond securing an mere expression of opinion, and even if they are taken, they have no value. So, cabinet members have no corporate rights as in Britain. Now, this is well illustrated by two anecdotes, one relating to America and other to Britain. Now, 7 nays, 1 yeas, and ayes have it. Now, announced President Lincoln during a cabinet consultation in which he found every member against him. Now, this attitude is so often contrasted with the Lord Melbourne's putting a question on Corn Law to the vote in the cabinet, saying it does not matter what we will say as long as we all say the same thing. So, the cabinet in the United States has been aptly described as President's family, and their power as a cabinet and their member stands against the President as per his wish and his will. Now, when we talk about the rule making in the presidential form, we find that the President also has legislative functions outlined in Article 2, Section 3 of the US Constitution. The President is required to report to the Congress on the state of the Union and can recommend measures that they deem necessary and expedient. The President has a duty, and that is to care that the law are faithfully executed, and has the power to convene or adjourn Congress in certain circumstances. The President also has the authority to receive ambassadors and other public ministers. The President's legislative role has grown over time, with changes in political and social forces contributing to their increased involvement in legislation. The executive in United States has no initiative in legislation except that the President may send messages from time to Congress, recommending the enactment of particular law. It is true that presidential messages are favorably received by Congress and greatly influences the course of legislation, yet the executive in America lacks all initiative and guidance, which is so important, rather basic feature of parliamentary government. Nor has the President the right to summon, except for extraordinary session, Congress, and the right to dissolve it. So, the Congress meets automatically on dates specified in the Constitution, and its duration is fixed. No doubt, the President can veto laws passed by Congress, but it is only a suspensive vote. If the bill voted by the President or the bill vetoed by the President is again passed by both the houses of Congress with a 2/3 majority in each house, it becomes law without the signature of the President and is forthwith promulgated. Now, talking about the characteristics of the presidential form, the quotation of Garner is important. What he said, what has been called presidential government as distinguished from cabinet or parliamentary government is that system in which the executive, including both the head of the state and his ministers, is constitutionally independent of the legislature in respect to the duration of his or their tenure and irresponsible to it for his or their political policies. So, a general separation of the executive from legislature under this form of government is made by the Constitution itself. The term presidential government has been widely used mainly because of the identification of this system with the American presidency. But this term is to some extent misleading. For an elected president, as in India, may be just a formal or nominal executive, and the real executive powers may in such case lie in the hands of a cabinet responsible to the legislature. Such provisions, however, do not make a presidential system. In fact, what concerns us distinguishing this type of government is not the existence of a president as such, but the role of an elected real executive, unmovable by the action of legislature. As the executive is independent of the legislature and the latter is powerless to shorten the term of the former, it makes the fixity of the executive. Now, because of this peculiarity, it is proper to call this government the fixed executive system rather than the presidential system. Now, working of the non-parliamentary or this fixed executive system or presidential system was invented as an alternative to the parliamentary system. Now, in this system, the president is directly elected by the people and is responsible for enforcing laws, while the legislature makes law and the courts it judges. So, the power is divided among many individuals and institutions, so no one can become supreme. Unlike a constitutional monarchy, the presidential system does not have a head of state, and the government consists of all three branches. Elections are held more frequently in this system, every 2 years for the legislature, every 4 years for the presidency. The president and legislators serve fixed terms, while judges are appointed for life. The president has total executive responsibility, and their cabinet is made up of individuals chosen by the president and approved by the Senate. But it can be vetoed. So, president cannot make laws, but he can veto it. State governments in the presidential system are independent and cannot be dissolved. So, the Constitution of the United States is usually quoted as the leading example of a constitution which embodies the non-parliamentary or fixed executive system. The system also operates in most states of Latin America. It is characterized by a system that what Constitution states as belonging to the executive branch really does belong to the office of the person who is carrying it out. So, the real or working executive is also the tutelar executive, and thus no such distinction is made between the nominal executive and the real executive as is founded in parliamentary system. So, when the Constitution of the United States says that the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America, Article 2, Section 1, it sets up a real executive who would actually exercise the powers with the Constitution and laws conferred upon him. Here it differs significantly from a similar looking provision of the Indian Constitution, Article 53(1), which states the executive powers of the Union shall be vested in the President. Unlike the American President, the Indian President, as a council of ministers, constitutionally provided to aid and advise the President in the exercise of his functions. So, the powers stated in the Indian Constitution do in fact belong to the Council of Ministers, removable by the House of the People. Hence, broadly speaking, the Indian President becomes in reality a nominal executive like the British King or Queen. Another feature of presidential system is its fixed tenure. Now, under the non-parliamentary or fixed executive system, the real executive is beyond legislative control. No vote of censure or want of confidence can have any legal effect on the executive. It is not subject to removal by parliament action or any kind of parliamentary motion, and is responsible only to the electorate. So, the legislature may of course impeach the executive for actual misconduct in exceptional cases, but the executive is not in any way responsible to the legislature for its acts and policies. Whether the executive stays or goes depend on the will of the legislature, but solely on it not depends on the will of the legislature, but solely on the will of the people as expressed in periodical election. So, the executive power in the United States is vested in the President of the United States. the President serves a 4-year term and can be re-elected once. The President is elected through the Electoral College, where each state appoints a number of electors based on its representation in Congress, and these electors, they vote for two persons. The person with the most vote becomes the President. The President has the power to appoint and receive ambassadors, conclude treaties, issue pardon, and convene Congress for special sessions. However, the President's veto can be overridden by a 2/3 vote by Congress. The President's public approval rating is important and can influence their power to persuade and lead. Now, the President of the United States has a group of advisors which has already been discussed as a cabinet, and this cabinet is made up of the head of different departments. So, like the departments of the state, these ministers do not enjoy any distinct identity. They are appointed by the President, they are confirmed by the President, and also they are appointed and later on confirmed by the Senate. So, the cabinet's main purpose is to provide advice to the President. They meet with the President in a room that is next to the Oval Office. So, the President chairs the meeting but is not actually a member of the cabinet. The cabinet does not have any executive power of its own and no votes needed to be taken. So, in the absence of any distinction between the nominal executive and real executive, the chief executive under the non-parliamentary or fixed executive system makes all cabinet members his assistant, who are denied the independent status enjoyed by the ministers in a parliamentary form of government. Thus, in the United States, the head of the executive departments and administrative agencies are appointed by the President and are removed by him. Then further, the President's cabinet is made up of Vice President and the head of the 15 executive departments in the United States. The cabinet members have more power within their department than as advisors to the President. The cabinet meetings in the United States are more for show than for making any policy decisions, and the President can choose cabinet members based on personal relationships and expertise. Now, there are not many requirements to be a cabinet minister, but they cannot be a member of Congress at the same time. So, cabinet members also have to go through an FBI background check for confirmation by the Senate. So, such cabinet members, however, not the member of legislature and are not in any way responsible to it, unlike the cabinet under the parliamentary system. So, the cabinet members are merely the servants of the President, the chief executive, and not of the legislature. They are politically responsible only to the President. So, with that, I come to the end of my presentation on presidential system as far as its features and its characteristics are concerned. Thank you.